Hello, good morning, and a very warm welcome to you from sunny London. Wherever you are today in the world, you're most welcome, and thank you so much for attending this important webinar on blended learning post-COVID. So many of you will have been watching our webinars over the last few months, and this is the third in the series of Education 2021. The first was on the road ahead, where we looked at how education was going to change over 2021 because of the continuing pandemic. And then last month we had a blueprint for school recovery, where we actually looked at possible solutions for COVID learning and how we could make that better. And this one, I believe, is equally important. Now that we know that blended learning is here to stay, most people believe it'll carry on even beyond the pandemic. It raises two really important questions for us. The first is, how do we build and adapt schools to make them suitable for blended learning? And the second is, how do we organize learning from home now that it looks like it's going to be more permanent, so that we massively increase educational outputs by paying attention to the environmental factors around us. And so to help answer these questions, I'm delighted to welcome the Executive Chairman of Learning Possibilities, Professor Stephen Heppel. Stephen needs very little introduction, but apart from Learning Possibilities, he runs his own consultancy, Heppel.net, and also is a professor of innovation at the University Camilo Jose Cela in Madrid. I hope I pronounced that correctly, Stephen.
Close enough.
So there will be, like with all the other webinars that we do, there will be a white paper that is produced at the end of this webinar. And it will be automatically sent out to you if you have registered on LinkedIn for this webinar. But if not, you will see at the bottom of the page our email address. Please feel free to drop us an email, and we will ensure that a copy is sent out to you. I would also say, please, register on our Facebook page or our LinkedIn page, so that you get updates on future webinars as well. We're planning to host these every month or so. So let's get started for today. And I'd like to ask Stephen, one simple question, which I've asked every panelist who's come on these webinars. And that is, do you believe that blended or hybrid learning is here to stay even when we get beyond COVID?
Yeah, good morning, everybody, and thanks for your attention. I think the vocabulary probably isn't here to stay. Blended, hybrid, modeless. There's a lot of different words to describe it. But I think the bottom line here is that learning's escaped. Learning's got out of the boxes that we put it into. Whether that's the classroom or the timetable or the curriculum or the age phasing, for a lot of children during COVID, and many people watching from all over the world. Many of you children, the schools have been shut for a year in parts of South America, for example. During that time, children have carried on with their learning, and but they've done it differently. I think the question here is whether the gene is going to go back into the bottle. I don't believe it will for a host of reasons. So I think we're in a new world of face-to-face and online and individual and collaborative learning. I think deep knowledge is probably more important than it was. Depth is probably more important than breadth. And we're going to explore during this chat just what that looks like. But I think learning changes every 75 years or so. I'm not old enough to remember all of that, but in England, around about sort of 1800, the churches were really keen for everybody to know the stories from the Bible and other religions, other cultures, were equally keen for their protocols and in their holy text, to be understood. So we had Sunday schools, and children all went to church on a Sunday and did a lot of learning. That was all the learning they did, really. People read them stories, and they remember 75 years after that, we'd had an industrial revolution, and of course, the new employers wanted people who could measure things, could do a little bit of numeracy, could tell the time, could arrive on time in the morning, and could read. If it said danger, they wanted you to better read the sign that said danger rather than fall in the machine. So in 1870, we had an Education Act in England that made primary education compulsory. If you were under 11, you had to go to school. 75 years on from that, we had the World War II, and World War II, pretty shocking event for many of us around the world. But what happened in England was that children were mixed up in new ways. They were evacuated from London from the bombing. They went to hide in air raid shelters for huge periods of time with other kids they wouldn't normally met with. And I think everybody realized that education was pretty unfair. Some children had great education, others had very little indeed. So we had the 1844 Education Act that said, okay, everybody must attend school at secondary age. So Bible classes, the church, primary school, employers, families saying we want secondary education, all through education. And here we are, 75 years later with COVID. And make no mistake, COVID is as big an event as World War II. More people died in England than died during the Blitz, for example. It's a huge event. But this time, I think it's children that are calling the shots. Children are saying, you know what, we've enjoyed our learning. We're doing things we weren't able to do before. We're learning outdoors. We're learning in depth. We're learning with other people of other ages. We're learning from adults other than teachers, but our teachers are still important to us. We ain't going back anytime soon. So, it's a 75-year cycle. I don't think we'll see the next 75-year switch. So we better make the best of this one, I think.
So I was going to say, and I should have said at the beginning, that there is a chat at the bottom of the link, the YouTube link, and whatever you put on there, both Professor Heppel and I can see. So please feel free to do that. And a couple of things that I just wanted to say. Firstly, that many people are asking, how do they register? There's an email address that will keep popping at the bottom of the screen. Please send us an email if you want to register. And also, just coming back to what Stephen said, there was an interesting comment from Mike Carter. Morning, Mike. He was just asking, do we think governments are going to put the genie back in the bottle and try and get back to traditional education so that they can control it? Stephen?
Well, I've worked with ministers from, being a professor for over 30 years, and I've worked with ministers of all parties in all countries during that. And, I've never found them to be malicious. But I think what we do see is ministers who went through education in a world of certainty. They were, they sat in a seating plan. They were all sitting next to, their colleagues. There was probably a structure to the stream of the school, and the day was very, you start at 9, you finish at 3, you wear your uniform, and they weren't exposed to uncertainty. They weren't exposed to surprises. So, of course, when things go wrong, the first thing they try to do is say, the sky's falling, let's go back to what we know. Now, what's interesting about that is, if you go back to the generation before them, the generation of children during the Second World War in England, and I think elsewhere too, their lives were full of surprises. They weren't expecting to be evacuated to go and work on a farm in Yorkshire somewhere. They weren't expecting to be sleeping in an underground shelter in their back garden. They weren't expecting to be hiding on the underground stations, And what's interesting is that generation were the generation that rebuilt the world after that terrible war. If I think of the names of the people that changed music, John Lennon, born in 1940, who changed fashion, Vivienne Westwood, born at the beginning of the war, who invented the home computer, Clive Sinclair, who was the outstanding actress of that era, Helen Mirren. All these were kids born in chaos. And as a result of that, they developed a resilience and they also developed ingenuity. Now that really matters, because if you think about what computers are good at, computers are really good at doing what they're told, repeating things, memorizing things, following rules. That's what computers do, being consistent and repeating. And a lot of our education systems, sadly, were built around being consistent and repeating. And, teachers literally standing outside the room where the exam was going on, and the children saying, "I hope there are no surprises on the exam paper." Well, that doesn't prepare you for a world full of surprises. And so we've had a group of ministers, the generation after the war generation, who aren't able to cope with surprises. And their response has been, we must get children back into school quickly. And we've been doing. I see a couple of people asking about certificates on the chat. So we thought, I'm kind of fed up with all the catastrophizing about children. Everybody's saying we must get children back into schools, if they're at home, disasters are occurring, which are, I think, is incredibly patronizing and a rather negative view of family life. So we haven't found that. We've found children. I was talking to somebody in our road the other day, and her son's done nothing that he was supposed to do. School has said, well, hasn't done any of it. And she was saying, on the other hand, he's just replumbed the bathroom, and he's now replumbing the neighbour's house, and he's 13. My own granddaughter, I live with my grandchildren, threw herself into sailing. And, she's gone through the certificates of qualification in sailing to the point, she's only 7 years old, but she's gone zonking through to them to the point when she's a sort of mid-teenage in terms of her qualifications. And so much so that the British Olympic Authority have just given her a boat. They said, "Oh, what a high flyer, here's a brand new boat. We want you to be at the Olympics after France," So what we've seen is kids doing extraordinary stuff. And not all of it's been good. I mean, not all of it's been nice. We've got 7-year-olds bringing up all their siblings, managing the washing, sorting out mum. Mum's on a 0 hours contract, and maybe they've got a drink problem, whatever. Kids have been heroic. I don't mean everything they've done has been, skip to the garden picking daisies. I mean, they've been doing tough stuff. So we've set up a certificate, and we have one here. It's a certificate that allows the children to say, this is what we've been doing. If you go to heppel.net, just like on the top of the screen, there's /golden, because I believe this is the golden generation. This is the generation who will be fixing climate change. They will be fixing population wars. They will be fixing global water shortages. They'll be fixing everything. And they can do it because they've been given this wonderful opportunity to learn in a new way. So kind of a long answer really to, will the ministers try and put them back in their boxes? Of course they will, because it's all they know. Will the kids go? Of course they won't, because they've seen better learning. And, if the schools can't offer it, they'll go somewhere else. They've got choices now. Blended gives you choices.
So, Stephen, let's talk a little bit about, and for those of you who didn't catch the certificate link, it'll come up again later on in the webinar today. So, if we think about that in terms of what this actually means for people who are running schools or building schools or using schools, today, if we're going to carry on with some form of learning that is blended or hybrid, where some of the kids are at home, some are at school, and there's a mixture. Presumably, we don't need schools that are built of the same size, because not everybody will be in school at the same time. And presumably, that also means we now have to start thinking a little bit more about the way that we teach and learn, because the kids won't be in front of the teachers all of the time. So, do you see those sorts of changes coming? And if so, what do they look like? I mean, compared to, for example, a school you may have been thinking about a year ago, what does this now look like?
Well, I mean, to some extent, Mehul, we could just shut up and watch the chat going past, because I see, Angela saying, the achievements of her children in, it have been transformational, and there's a string of people going past there talking about, the progress the children have made during this extraordinary and tragic year. So, what we've found, by the way, from this certificate, of course, I'm now sitting on this wonderful data set of, tens of thousands of kids, things that they've done during lockdown, and, anybody would be delighted. If you took a set of 21st century skills, what do I need to be able to be, useful in this new millennium? It's pretty much a close match with what the kids have chosen to do, given the space and time. So, it is hugely encouraging. But to finish off that bit about, computers are good at all those repetition, batch processing, rule following systems, what should we be doing? And, wherever we are, if we're still in a very traditional school, we do need to focus on the things that computers can't do. And really, that's ingenuity, that's curiosity, that's deep knowledge, it's collaboration, it's solving unexpected problems. So, if you're looking to reconfigure your school, I think there are 3 golden rules. The first one is agency. I mean, you really, really want the children's voice to be the central part of this, asking them, get them all to fill in the certificate. And there's Lucy Huberman getting excited about the certificate. Morning, Lucy. It's a great way to get the class showing off what they've been doing. So get your school all to dive in. Look, the certificate's free. I'm not trying to sell anything. It's hebble.net/golden, and fill it in. So you've got a basis to talk about what have you been doing. Secondly, try to introduce surprise to learning as often as you can. Clearly, I don't mean you come in dressed as a clown and try and juggle with textbooks, but when we were doing learning with the British Olympic teams, and I do lucky enough to do learning with elite sports as well, one of the things I learned from the hockey folk, where we made over their learning spaces transform, they do a thing called Thinking Thursday, where they come in on a Thursday and they never know quite what to expect. And I know that some of our schools in Australia that have been implementing discovery days, where you come in and you go, oh my lord, as you walk into the school, there's a cutout of a body on the pavement, and there's police tape all over the place, and suddenly you've got a day of forensic science to try and work out what's happened. The sense that you might come into school and be surprised, not surprised in just popping out from behind a tree, but surprised in the way that you have to apply the deep knowledge you've been accumulating. That's terrific. So give the learners agency, try to put some surprise in there, and probably most of all, learn from sport that aggregation of marginal gains. Don't take anything for granted. Anything you do, say, but actually, why do we? We've got 1,000 teenagers. Why do we think we can ring a bell and have them all simultaneously hungry? If I was Dr. Skinner with a cage full of rats, I couldn't get them all to be hungry when I rang the bell. Why would I think that's going to work with teenagers? Why wouldn't we perhaps have a model of grazing, allowing them to feed when they're hungry, when they need it, when their brains say, I need more food and blood sugar, So critique everything you do, every single thing, critique it with the kids. So give the students agency, inject a few surprises, leave no stone unturned, And the great thing about the aggregation of marginal gains, you'd be amazed how the little differences add up to enormous differences. Let me give you an example of it. We've been looking at CO2 in classrooms. We're really worried about levels of CO2 in classrooms, and we built these little boxes. Here's one, a little manometer box. They measure CO2, as you can see, which just on 1,000. 1,000 is just about the limit for where the brain starts to struggle a little bit, and you lose concentration. Now, we know that when CO2 levels go up above 1,000, behaviour gets worse because children can't concentrate on the task in hand. And and typically when you measure this in a classroom with the door shut and the window shut, you find the CO2 builds and builds to lunchtime and then goes down a little bit at lunchtime because they probably go out with the doors open, but it never goes back to where it should be. And for many children in many schools in the world, the only time when the air in their learning space is optimal is about the first hour in the day. After that, there's a kind of snooze fest going on, and they're literally gassing themselves with their own emissions. And what we found, of course, as we came to COVID, when it really matters to have the windows open and, crucially, the doors. No good opening the windows because CO2 is a heavy gas, and so are those aerosols that carry the COVID problems. And so when you open the doors, the whole room ventilates. When you open the window, only the top half ventilates. So we suddenly found, of course, that rooms that had low CO2 were good for your brain and good for your well-being as well. Now, you don't need to spend a lot of money to sort that out. You just need to open the windows, open the doors, and put a lot of plants in the room, and you're done. So these are easy fixes. That one difference you will see within a month in terms of children's engagement, their behaviour, their academic progress, a reduction in ADHD, because not all the kids with ADHD have got ADHD. Significant number of them are having their attention deficited by bad spaces rather than anything that's wrong with them. So, little things make an enormous difference.
Is it just CO2, Stephen, or are there other factors that also affect learning?
I mean, what we collect with these little boxes, humidity, temperature really matters. Try and get between 18 and 21 degrees if you can. TVOCs, we do the total volatile organic compounds, which are those nasty smells. If I take my whiteboard marker, smell it. There's a bit of a blimey, I shouldn't have done that. There's a bit of a buzz, as the solvents go into the atmosphere. So we're measuring about 50 different organic compounds, volatile organic compounds, and they're really damaging. And we found, alarmingly, we found those have gone up during COVID because people are deep cleaning. So they're cleaning the classroom to try and keep the children safe, but in doing so, they're damaging the children's brains with really high levels. Alarmingly high levels of TVOC. So, but again, the minute you measure it, you say, oh, right, so we'd better clean the class at the end of the day. And when we do it with the windows, the doors all open, because those chemicals hang around for about 5 to 6 hours. So if you clean it at lunchtime, that's the kids gone for the afternoon. And just in passing, when I was running this thing, I clicked on it and it gave me CO2 levels of 1,000, and CO2 levels are now already in this room down to 761 parts per million. So just while I've been telling you this, I've gone from over 1,000 down to 700. All I did was open the window by my desk. So you can make the changes. But the point here is we put kids in a box, and it's a really bad box for learning. Typically, the physical environment is way suboptimal. If learning was the Olympics, not a single kid would be in the classroom. So what do? Well, we start looking at outdoor learning. I don't mean going outdoors and, playing on the swings and the climbing wall. I mean moving the class out of doors to do their learning where they go. We just got a big project we're involved in with Essex Local Authority here of outdoor learning, of literally just putting classrooms in the in the outdoor space. And when you look at the world, you realise that for a huge number of children who've got very little money for education, I mean, 25 million kids in Pakistan haven't even got a school to go to. They probably don't need one. Probably the effort to build buildings and all the expense of that. If I had to choose between walls and teachers, I'd spend my money on teachers. So there's a real reconfigure here. And I think what I said at the beginning, which is learning's escaped, it's gone to a lot of places we weren't expecting. It's gone to homes, it's gone out of doors, it's gone up trees, it's gone into the sea, it's gone to the beach, it's gone into museums.
So if you think about some of those things that you talked about, CO2 levels, like, ventilation, getting the light levels to the correct level, paint, noise, humidity, temperature, putting plants in, all of those sorts of things. If we get that right, Stephen, how much of a difference does that make? Is that marginal? Is that profound? How much difference does that make to a child's education?
Well, it's enormous. It is actually enormous. I mean, and I'm just enjoying the comments going past, by the way, with Vanessa saying how independent children had to become learning from home, and they weren't sitting there with a mum at their elbow checking. They really did have to look after themselves in a way that normally they don't do until university. So it kind of begs the question of what age are children ready for university. But anyway, let's come back to the magnitude thing. So there's one of the. I mean, we did a huge literature search, of course, when we were building the little learnometers, and the learnometer.net, if you want to go and look. And there's a huge Chinese study where they looked at children who were near high levels of pollution, by which they really meant near a busy road. And the PM 2.5s, the microparticulates, the dust from diesel pollution and so on, were a big part of the pollution in their classrooms. And it was building. They didn't have a filter, they didn't have ventilation, they didn't have any way of getting it out. Those children, when they got to 15 years old, on average, had dropped a year of schooling. Now, everybody's getting very excited about, our children have lost 6 months of schooling due to COVID. Our children lose a year of schooling every year due to pollution. They lose enormous amounts of learning because, and we've seen it, we're sitting on, 5-6 million hours of data. I can show you what proportion of the school day are children bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and it ain't much. And it's not the kids' fault. Nothing wrong with those brains. They're full of curiosity and ingenuity and all those other things. Just flipping hard to be curious in the room that's too hot and too dark and too full of gas, So these are huge numbers, Mihal, and it's not just the children we've got being 20, 30, 40% better. That's the order of magnitude we're talking about. It's also the children who aren't in education at all. There's 2.2 billion kids on the planet. Now, interestingly enough, only about half of them have much of a go at education. Now, some of them get a bit of a primary education, or they're sitting in a room with 70 others, copying from a chalkboard on the horizon, But so 2.2 billion kids, half of them aren't having the kind of education they're going to need if they're going to solve climate crisis or whatever, be better doctors and nurses. Of the 1.1 billion who do get an education, about half of them would report no joy, really. They've had an experience which was not pleasant. There was bullying, there was all sorts of reasons why they didn't enjoy it. Now, half the people listening to this now will have had a bad time at school. And they don't come out of school saying, I can't wait for a lifetime of learning, take me to it. They come out and say, thank goodness that's over now, let's get on with the rest of my life. So we're down to a quarter of the children that we could possibly have solving our global problems. And of them, we fail about half. We put them into an exam system that doesn't acknowledge the things they go. It's not that they don't succeed, but some children are really good collaborators. Some children really like to pursue depth. When we used to run notschool.net, which I know many of you will know about, our virtual school for kids who'd been excluded from school, they used to tell me with a smile that the thing about schools is when you're really bad at something, they make you do more of it. And it's like, I'm really bad at maths, so I had to do more maths instead of going to PE. And I wanted to be a footballer. So schools have a knack somehow of not allowing children to succeed as much as. So we've failed. So we're left with 2.2 billion kids, and we're left with a handful that we're going to hope to solve the world's problem. We need all hands on deck. These are people, we need every kid to be the best they can be.
Is that, I mean, one of the reasons, and there are so many comments on here, Dave Wiley, others have talked about this, that when you look at this idea of assessment and exams, is that the limiting factor? Is that what stops us actually taking learning outside? And you've seen that, whilst this pandemic's been running, at least in the UK, the government has stopped all public exams for the last 2 years, which almost says that they can't be run whilst the kids are not in school and sitting doing traditional exams. So is that a limiting factor, and is that something that's got to change? And if we change it, how do we change it so that we start to assess new ways of learning?
Well, these are great questions, by the way. I mean, the assessment's really interesting for a heap of reasons. So let's just dwell on that for a moment. So when the COVID thing first hit, we had a lot of children who were right at the peak of the exam cycle because they couldn't take the exams. And so their teachers did a really good job of assessing their performance over the previous 2 years. It was moderated. They had to justify every decision they made. Not all the decisions were popular. I mean, you were going to get an A, I have to tell you, but you're going to get an E in the other subject. I can't hide it. So there were some tough conversations on the back of all that. And that was criticised because children, when they were assessed on the totality of their learning, did a little better than when they were judged in just one exam. Now, we know why that is. It's because when you go into the exam room, if you happen to be menstruating, or you happen to have hay fever, or your dog died, or your dad just left last week, there are a million reasons why that one moment is not representative of your performance. And I mean, if I had £1 for every teacher who'd said to a child, "You're better than that, Mark, I'm really sorry," So we suddenly realised that exams aren't as good as they could be or should be. And unfortunately, our ministers didn't quite have the imagination to say, right, let's focus on an alternative. But the alternative's been forced on them anyway by, a long-term lockdown. So I'm kind of wondering, firstly, who will be the first exam board to break and say, you know what, we're going to give A-levels based entirely on what the teachers tell us, because we think that's more accurate, which will be very interesting. But also, listen to this. Back in 2002, I was quite critical of the exam system we had then, which is pretty much the exam system we got now, although now we've got probably a bit less coursework even than we did then. And I wrote this quite sniffy letter. For me, I'm a pretty easygoing bloke, but it was quite critical to the Qualification and Curriculum Authority, the QCA, and said, guys, you're doing this wrong. You're doing this wrong. And to their credit, they wrote back and said, okay, Stephen, you've got a bit of a reputation. How would you do it? And we set up a project called eViva. You can search for it online, eViva, all one word. And what that allowed us to do was we said to children, this was in 7 schools over 4 years. So we said to children, what we would like you to do is, here's a list of all the learning outcomes, the attainment targets you could reach during your school career, actually. Which one do you think you're going to have a go at this year? And the kids would say, well, I could do that. Oh, that looks a bit difficult to do that. They picked a set of learning outcomes. Secondly, they had to demonstrate during the year, they had to narrate their ability to hit those learning outcomes. And thirdly, right at the end, the telephone rang and it was Viva. They did a Viva on the phone. This was cutting edge, so we're pretty good at this stuff. So this was talking to a huge mainframe computer, voice recognition, and so on. And then the teachers moderated those comments. Now, 3 things came out of that. Number 1, no child, not one child, 7 schools, 4 years, set learning outcomes for themselves that were as unambitious as the curriculum. They all thought they could do better than they were supposed to be doing in school. That's damning. Secondly, not one child missed on achieving the targets they set themselves. So they said, you know what, I could be this good. And they went on to be. Now, we could have a long conversation here about metacognition, reflective practice, and so on. But the basic thing was giving them an agency to say how good they can be. And they turned out to be way better than we thought they were supposed to be. But the really interesting bit was that ability to talk when ready to do your Viva on the phone. And they absolutely loved that. Not a moment when you all sit together looking nervous and Linda behind's just been sick because she's so scared. Just sitting on your own bed, answering privately questions about the work you've been doing was a real privilege for them. We knew who they were because we had voice recognition. We could tell accurately if it was a kid or their mum trying to pretend to be them. Not that anybody tried to cheat, but we'd have caught them if they had. Now, why that is really interesting is because that's what universities are like. People come into universities and they say to themselves, I reckon I can go for a first and I'm going to get my head down and do it. And everybody really enjoys the Viva because it's a chance to talk about the learning that you've done. None of that happens in schools. So, you can see that a better assessment system would show us how good the kids are. The current assessment system masks how good they are, and I think that's a tragedy.
How do we swap to this new system? What is it that's preventing us from going there? Is it about having the right sort of infrastructure, or having teachers available to assess in this way? What prevents us from moving to this?
I mean, I'm a huge fan of teachers. Teachers, live and breathe their children's performance. That's why when they put the little learnometer boxes, they go, blimey, let's sort the room out, put in more plants quick. Every teacher wants their children to be the best they can possibly be. But I think, Bill, it's a bit like the British Olympic team in years gone by. If I go back to Atlanta, where we only won one gold medal, it was Vincent and Redgrave for rowing, one gold medal. And what we did to train our athletes was we did it by numbers. Most of the coaches had come out of the armed forces, and in those days, not anymore, but in those days, the armed forces were all about do this, then do this, then do this. It was very formulaic. So, they'd tell you what to do, and if you got it wrong, you'd have to do press-ups by way of penalty, and it was all, but it didn't make people clever in their sport. It made them fit. And of course, they kept getting surprised. Brendan Foster would be on the start line of the 10,000 meters, and he would be surprised, and his standard, the run that he always did, start off slow, go fast, sprint the last lap, didn't work because everybody knew he was going to do it. So, cut through to Rio just the other year, and you'll find our athletes are full of the ability to solve problems and to be fit, and they came out of that with so many medals that I don't think anybody listening to this could even name all the gold medalists in England and other countries that have gone that route. So it's about releasing our teachers to help them inspire children, to help them convey deep knowledge. I mean, a lot of our teachers have been dragged into a place where, okay, you've got an hour on Vikings and then we move on, but my PhD was on Vikings, so I really want to do Vikings. Sorry, it's only a little bit of the curriculum. We've got to allow deep knowledge and deep learning in there somewhere. And if we do that, we've got a clearer space for it. And that means getting rid of some of the breadth. And that's a very interesting proposal. I don't believe teachers are reluctant. Watch the comments going past. People would say, "Yay, let's do it." So I mean, "Yay, let's do it."
Another interesting comment that just popped up was that if you're thinking about these alternative types of learning, blended learning, are they all dependent on technology, or large parts of the world still don't have the infrastructure that you need, power, internet, etc. So how do you make this, work in a real way in those sorts of places?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, a lot of I've talked to, I think, over 100, and Lisa's following, she'd probably know the number, but I've talked about 103, I think now, ministers of education or their most senior civil servant in the last 12 months. And to my surprise, really, about 30% of them, as soon as the pandemic hit, their children went to radio. They ran to radio because that broadcasts, you can have a quite intimate conversation with somebody over the radio, and they can then get on with their job. So we went to that sort of asynchronous model of listen to the radio, go off and do it, which actually is quite good. Whereas others, just try to recreate the live classroom online, where you sit at home and it's your teacher zooming to you, and because that doesn't work, and we know it doesn't work in terms of equity, because if you're a kid at home and there's only one laptop and there isn't much bandwidth, and there are 3 siblings and mum is trying to hold her 0 hours contract together as well, you can't all be online at the same time. It's obvious. I mean, if you're in a wealthy family, you've got a laptop each and, cable coming in the windows, that's fine. But for most kids, access to the technology is unfair for synchronous learning. Synchronous learning, we've all got to be doing it together, is the one where we exclude huge numbers of children. So automatically we want to be in a place of asynchronous learning, where here's what you've got to do, go off and do it, come back, have a plenary, follow up, put your, we know how all this works, and we've known how it's worked for actually most of my lifetime, most of my career. So we know what to do. And equity isn't about just giving them all a laptop. It's about getting away from 100% synchronous. It's not the same. There are still moments when you need direct instruction. There are still moments, I've got my kids, what have we got here? I've got, around for an example.
Let me just interrupt, Stephen, because there's a couple of interesting points there. I mean, we have a lot of people from the Philippines, and I know that they've got a TV station now where they do learning in this way. But the question around that, though, is that does that mean that we should be, pushing children to become more independent learners around, in their learning, and does that, affect people who have perhaps learning difficulties, in some way, or do you think it works for everybody?
Well, there are 2 things. I mean, one is, of course, we need children to use technology to do this, and we need the technology to help them to do that asynchronously. And that means I still need some synchronous instruction. I still need my teacher to explain to me the difference between, I've got a robot and I'm programming the robot to go in a triangle, I say repeat 3 times, go forwards, turn by 60 degrees, and I think it's going to be a triangle, and then the robot goes off and it just gives me a wiggly line. I don't know what's happening. My teacher comes along and explains to me the difference between internal angles and external angles. You've got to turn 120 degrees to turn around a triangle, not 60 degrees. I need my teacher for that stuff. But I don't need them to be doing it live necessarily. It doesn't need to be my teacher. Some people are inspired at helping you to do the things you need to do. I mean, we've had over 1 million people here doing PE with Joe Wicks on the television, and he shows them what to do, and then they go off and do it. You don't have to do it live. You can do it when you like. So teachers still offer that expertise, particularly to get you into deep learning, but also to early repair misunderstandings before they get to be too damaging. And I guess the curriculum always gets filled up. Ministers love to put things in. They hate to take things out. When calculators came along, they didn't say, let's add calculators. They said, okay, we need to know about calculators. It's got to be the right sort of calculator, none of this dodgy stuff. So, a lot of our curriculum get filled up. There's an argument going on in Australia about the magnitude of that core curriculum, and it's growing and growing. We have to leave space. We have to leave space for learning. And However, one of the things we learned during COVID is that learning doesn't start at 9:30 and finish at 3 o'clock. There's the children doing project-based learning with other children around the world. Let's imagine we're doing a project now and looking at where folk are. So, I do the project. As a kid, I passed it on to my classmates, my project collaborators who happen to be in New York. They pass it on to San Francisco. San Francisco pass it on to Hawaii. Hawaii sends it on to Japan. Japan passes it on to Jakarta. They pass it on to Eastern Europe, and it comes back to me. So it's gone right round the world, my little collaborative piece, And I wake up in the morning, wonder how they've got on, I'm kind of getting up early to see what they've done with my project questionnaire or whatever. Learning is 24/7. And again, we've put it in boxes. And because we put it in boxes, there's not enough room to do all the learning that needs to be done. Kids got out of the boxes, we put them back in and then find the boxes are too full. That's our fault. We've got to leave a little bit of space, haven't we?
Do you not think that one of the problems that happens if kids aren't in school is that this idea of building that discipline and that focus around learning at specific times and so on, that's lost a little bit? Or do you think that that's not really that necessary?
Oh golly gosh! I mean, every teacher watching this knows you need a behaviour policy and it needs to work. And every parent watching this needs, does know the same thing. You've got to have your boundaries. This area of behaviour has become a bit of a false dichotomy. There's sort of you've either got kids, obeying every last tiny detail, or you've got them sort of running riot, climbing trees and attacking teachers. It's a complicated thing. But behaviour comes from engagement, of course. When children are, and every teacher watching this will tell you a story of a truculent child or two who suddenly became passionate about an area of the curriculum, and whether it was motorcycle maintenance or space rockets, whatever, suddenly sort of pushed themselves off into that. I remember talking to a girl in Kent when we were doing Building Schools for the Future on the Isle of Sheppey. She got a folder of naughtiness the size of an old telephone directory, and yet for the last 18 months she'd been angelic, I think would cover it. And I said to her, what's happened here? Now, she's in a mixed age school with a lot of peer mentoring. She said quite simply, it's really hard to be naughty when you're looking after an 8-year-old. So there are things we can do in our protocols that help behaviour to stick, but behaviour still matters. Look, if you go to the cinema, I've said this 1,000 times, you go to the cinema and a group of children sit in the row in front of you, the children are all the same age, a bunch of 13-year-old boys, they're going to be naughty. You might as well leave now because you're not going to hear a word Daniel Craig says, On the other hand, if it's a mixed age group and you've got some youngsters, a couple of older girls looking after them, the older girls will take the little ones to the toilet. One of the boys will be in charge of popcorn. They'll all have something to do. They'll sit and watch the film in a lovely way. So bring them into school, sit them in a room where they're all the same age, and don't be surprised when their behaviour is hard work to control. It's all part of it. The aggregation of marginal gains, and at the same time, you've got kids who've gone, catastrophically misbehaving. You can't just walk up and stroke them. You've got to do something to keep the others learning. It's a complicated thing, all this, but then learning is complicated.
So let me ask you this. I've asked so many people this question, but we're now at a crossroads. We have a vaccine. We have hope because of the vaccine. They seem to be working. They're being rolled out, and at the same time, we still have this pandemic raging, and parts of Europe have gone again into lockdown this week, and so on. So when you have those two factors in play, what do you see happening to learning now for the next 12 months? How do you see it changing or opening up, or do you see more of the same as we've had over the last 12 months?
Well, it's it's a very interesting time because several things are happening at once. I mean, we're having a COVID baby boom. You know, for a lot of people, when they lock down, they we've seen everything on Netflix. What are we going to do? Oh, I know, let's make babies. You know, so we've got an enormous number of babies coming through, and we probably haven't got room for them all for sure. We've got the evacuation of some of our city schools. I know some of the schools I'm working with in the middle of London, 25-30% of their families have gone because they just want out of the city. It's a dangerous place to be now. And at the same time, we've got children who don't need to be there 5 days a week to learn. When I'm just laughing here, I love the chat window because there's conversations. I love that Lisa and Mike Carter having a chat about, you know, about when you measure the atmosphere, how important it is for your brain. Your brain isn't well-being, but well-being is a byproduct. I mean, there's a whole kind of PhD running over there in the chat window, which is really nice. But Lisa and I were on a call with a group of children in Scotland, and we said to them, how many days a week do you think you need to attend school to be able to be still, you know, have your bestie and you're still really good friends and that teacher you really want to be, you know, your sort of dream teacher, you still see her often enough. We said, hold up your hands and how many days do you think you need to attend? And nobody said 5. The average was 2. So clearly kids don't need to be in the buildings as much as they are. And that opens up all sorts of possibilities about whether we need such big buildings, whether we can put them somewhere else. And at the same time, the high street is collapsing. I mean, there won't be a department store left in Britain within 2 years. Why would you go to a department store to nearly buy the thing you wanted when you can buy it online and the exact thing will arrive within 12 hours, you know, and you haven't had to park and drive there and all the other things. So they're gone. But department stores would make great learning spaces. Costa Coffees would make great learning spaces because they are great learning spaces. You go in, there are people sitting on sofas having conversations, people with their elbows on, still standing having conversations, people on laptops. They're full of learning. You just go there to drink coffee and then get on with their learning, you know. So I think our high streets are going to go from high streets. I mean, they've already changed. They used to be Market Square. People used to arrive in the middle of our communities with pigs and sell them. They don't do that anymore. If I go to the high street in Colchester, it's been a long time since I saw a pig. You know, they've still got Market Square. And the high street is going to stop being full of shops. And I think, why wouldn't it become Learning Lane? Why wouldn't it be that place you can go to do the learning that you need with others when you need it and with the resources that you couldn't begin to afford at home? I mean, learning's great, but, you know, I haven't got a Van de Graaff generator at home. I haven't got you know, magnesium. I haven't got lots of things I haven't got at home that I need. I haven't got a decent microscope. So there's places, you know, I can see learning, you know, kind of moving into some of the other spaces that have been at the heart of our communities. And I think a lot of our schools will be left empty, and some of them probably deserve to be empty because the buildings are falling down, you know. So I think there's a whole change going on here. The question is, who's going to own the buildings? Will it be Starbucks Academy, or will it be, you know, just a place where you go to meet your friends? Will it be, you know, what's the governance of all that? And I don't know, but I do know it isn't the model we've got at the moment. That's for sure.
Fantastic. So we've got very few minutes left, Stephen. So a couple of things just for people to take away. If they are interested in the environmental factors around learning, I know there's a lot of material on your website about that, and you know, which talks in great detail about you know, each of the factors, light and carbon dioxide and etc. And there's, you know, the website address is at the bottom of the screen and at the top. If people are interested in the Learnometer that you showed a bit earlier on, is that available at the moment?
Yeah, they are available, and we've you know, we're about 5 years down the track here. Here's one of the original printed circuit boards. You can just say this is helpful Learnometer on it. You know, this is all. The great thing about this stuff is you can design it on a computer. You know, send off the designs, have it made in the Philippines or wherever. They come back, you assemble them. Some of the original boxes look like this. Sorry, like you've got trousers on. You know, we 3D printed the originals, and then finally we turned the thing into a proper functioning product that you can buy. And I don't know why every school in the world hasn't bought them, to be honest, because they're flipping cheap. But I mean, you can find a link to from my website or go to learnometer.net. But everything's 25 million people on my website last year. So there's loads of people doing this. I don't think there are very many education ministers on my website, but 25 million others, I'll take every time. You know, this is a revolution from the bottom up. Change is being led, just to recap, not by the church anymore, not by employers anymore, not by families anymore. This is that golden generation of ingenious, creative, playful, rather delightful children who are building new learning, and they're the same children that are standing shoulder to shoulder with Greta saying we need to fix the planet, the same children that are protesting about politics in Hong Kong or wherever else. This is a generation who have enough knowledge to know when it can be better. Learning can be better, and they ain't going back in the bottle mill, not anytime soon.
Fantastic. So if you want to know more about learning and learning environments and learning factors and the Learnometer, heppel.net is the place to go. Also, it's the place to go if you want to print out those certificates for children or people who've been heroes in the pandemic, and it's absolutely free. And you there's a fantastic program there that you can do that. I've done that myself. I just want to say a very big thank you to Stephen for being on here. Pleasure as always. Looking forward to doing this again.
Yeah, I mean, you should say the work we've been doing at Learning Possibilities Plus is pretty flipping fab in all this. You know, we've been around a very long time. The backbone we built for learning. If folk don't know about it, go and have a look. It is really good. And also, we should curate. I mean, the chat window has been so good. I found it quite distracting. The comments are so useful that we certainly ought to capture that and turn it into a PDF and just ship it out to people, because, and there's a lot of wise old souls in there, but people with more sense than me, you know. So it's a really useful thing. We should curate that.
We will do that. We'll take that off curated and put that up with this. And this program or this webinar will be available on Catch Up. And as I said at the beginning, if you want to get a copy of the white paper that comes as a result of that, please either send us an email on the email address at the bottom of the screen, or make sure you register on LinkedIn, where we can pick up your email and send that across to you. And finally, what remains to be said is that our next webinar in the Education 2021 series, which is about do we need Education 4.0 and how will we get to it? That's going to be on April the 8th. Details will come up from tomorrow on Facebook and LinkedIn. If you're registered with us, you'll get an email as well. And so please register. We look forward to seeing you. If you have any questions or comments, you can get hold of Stephen at heppel.net. You can get through to us at the addresses at the bottom of the webinar. So all that remains is to say a big thank you again to Stephen. Thank you for your time and your wisdom. Look forward to really doing this again. And to all of you everywhere, thank you for tuning in from the chat. I can see people from Philippines and South Africa and India and everywhere around the world. And it's been lovely hosting you. Thank you so much for your time. Look after yourselves, stay safe, and see you all very soon. Thank you so much. Goodbye.